The autumn sun was a pale, watery thing that morning, washing the streets of Hillsborough in a gentle, gray light. It was the kind of day that felt quiet, meant for small, unhurried tasks. The woman who walked toward the Community Arts Center seemed to match the weather perfectly. She was not someone you would notice in a crowd, or even in a small room. Her coat was a soft, warm navy blue, and her dark hair was pulled back into a simple braid that trailed over her shoulder. She carried a small, sensible bag, and her steps were measured and quiet on the pavement. Her name was Elena Petrov, and she was a person who had learned, over many years, the value of not being seen. The Hillsborough Community Arts Center was a friendly, slightly shabby building that hummed with well-intentioned energy. Posters for past recitals and pottery classes adorned the bulletin boards, their corners curling. The air smelled of old paper, lemon-scented polish, and faintly of dust. Elena pushed open the heavy door, the sound of a piano scale stumbling its way up and down from a distant room, greeting her dot at the front desk. A young man with bright eyes and a name tag that read Intern smiled warmly. "Hi there. Can I help you?" Elena offered a small, tentative smile in return. "Yes, please. I was hoping to inquire about the piano lessons. The adult beginner class." "Oh, fantastic," the intern said, pulling out a brochure. "That's on Wednesday evenings, 7 o'clock. Our instructor is Mr. Alden. He's wonderful, really patient with beginners." The word beginners hung in the air. Elena simply nodded, her eyes scanning the brochure without really seeing it. "That sounds suitable," she said, her voice soft, with a faint melodic accent that was hard to place. "I would like to enroll." As she filled out the form, her handwriting was neat and precise. Under previous experience, she paused for a long moment. The intern, chatting about the center's payment plan, didn't notice the hesitation. Finally, Elena wrote, in clear letters, * some childhood lessons. Very basic. Wish to reconnect with fundamentals. *. It was not, strictly speaking, a lie. It was simply a very small piece of a much larger truth. A truth she had carefully folded and tucked away. Like a precious letter in a drawer she rarely opened. Her first class was the following Wednesday. The room was a standard music classroom. A few upright pianos lined against the wall, a larger electric keyboard at the front, and a circle of chairs. The other students were a mix of people: a retired man with kind eyes, a mother in her 30s who said she was finally doing something for herself, a younger guy who wanted to impress his girlfriend. They were all friendly, slightly nervous, united by the shared awkwardness of starting something new as an adult. Mr. Alden bustled in right at 7. He was a man in his late 50s who carried himself with the air of someone who was very important to a small world. He wore a tweed jacket with leather patches on the elbows, and his glasses were perpetually perched on the end of his nose. He greeted everyone with a booming, "Welcome, welcome. Let's make some music." His enthusiasm was genuine, but it had a teacherly, slightly performative edge to it. "Now," he said, clapping his hands together, "let's go around. Tell me your name and why you're here. What calls you to the glorious instrument that is the piano?" When it was Elena's turn, she kept her gaze on her hands, folded in her lap. "My name is Elena," she said, her voice barely above a murmur. "I had some lessons long ago. I have forgotten almost everything. I wish to start again, from the very beginning, to find the simple joy in it." Mr. Alden beamed. "A beautiful sentiment, Elena. Starting from scratch, a clean slate. That's the spirit." He had already categorized her, the shy one, the one who would need the most encouragement to come out of her shell. The lesson began with the very basics. The names of the keys. Proper hand posture. Mr. Alden demonstrated on the keyboard at the front, his fingers pressing down with deliberate instructional slowness. C, D, E, F, G. Simple as climbing a little ladder. Elena took her seat at one of the upright pianos, its finish scratched and dull. She looked at her hands, then at the keys. For a fleeting second, as her fingers hovered above the ivory, a deep, old familiarity trembled in her muscles, a memory of speed, of power, of a keyboard flying beneath her touch. She consciously stilled it. Then she pressed down on middle C. The note sounded clear and a little teeny in the small room. She played the 5-note scale, her movements slow, careful, almost artificially clumsy. She made sure her thumb stumbled slightly when passing under her 3rd finger. She made sure the rhythm was not perfectly even. "Good, good," Mr. Alden said, patting her shoulder as he passed. "Don't worry about the stumble. That's what we're here for." He moved on to the next student. Elena continued, playing the simple pattern again and again, each time with the same measured, hesitant slowness. Inside, a strange duel was happening. Part of her, the deepest part, heard the music in her head not as these single, plodding notes, but as rich chords and flowing melodies. That part of her yearned to let her hands loose, to feel the music pour out. But a stronger, more recently built part of her held tight to the reins. This was not that place. This was not that life. Here, she was just Elena, the quiet woman reconnecting with an old hobby. Over the next few weeks, she became a fixture in the class. She was always the first to arrive, sitting quietly until Mr. Alden came in. She listened intently to every instruction, her head tilted slightly. She never asked questions. She practiced the simple, childish tunes. Mary Had a Little Lamb, Ode to Joy, in a single-finger melody, with a seriousness that Mr. Alden found both endearing and a little amusing. "You're trying too hard, Elena." He would chuckle. "Relax. Let the music flow. It's not brain surgery." She would just nod, offering that faint smile, and go back to playing with deliberate, painstaking care. Her hands, which were elegant and long-fingered, always seemed to be moving with a conscious restraint, as if they were remembering how to be still. One afternoon, after class, she was wiping down the keys of her piano with a soft cloth she carried in her bag, a fastidious habit Mr. Alden had noticed when the director of the center came in. Miss Braithwaite was a woman of sharp angles and efficient movements, with a cloud of perfume that arrived a moment before she did. She was passionate about the center, but her passion was often expressed through fundraising targets and community visibility. "How's the new crop, Robert?" she asked Mr. Alden, her eyes scanning the room, already assessing. "Oh, coming along," Mr. Alden said cheerfully. "We've got some real enthusiasm, especially Elena here." He gestured to the woman, quietly putting on her coat. "A total beginner, but she has the dedication of a concert pianist. Always the last to leave, practices every scrap I give her." Miss Braithwaite's gaze swept over Elena, taking in the modest coat, the quiet demeanor. She gave a professional, approving smile. "Wonderful. Dedication is key. Keep it up, dear." Her attention was already moving on, back to Mr. Alden. "We need to talk about the gala program. I want to showcase student progress. Something impactful." Elena murmured a soft "good night" and slipped out the door, the sound of their discussion about demonstrable outcomes fading behind her. The cool evening air was a relief. She walked home to her small, tidy apartment, where the only luxury was a beautiful, old, meticulously maintained upright piano that stood by the window. She did not sit at it that night. Some days, the act of pretending in class was enough. It satisfied the old ache, but in a gentle, manageable way. It was like visiting a familiar, vast ocean, but only ever walking ankle-deep at the shore. It was safe. It was quiet. It was what she had come here for. To be a woman with a simple, quiet life, where the music was small and the world was even smaller. She had no idea that the small world of the Arts Center, with its eager teacher and ambitious director, was about to turn its well-meaning, unseeing eyes directly toward her, and in doing so, threatened to break the peaceful silence she had built around herself like a glass bell. The Hillsborough Community Arts Center's annual fundraising gala was the talk of the small institution for weeks. Posters replaced the curling ones on the bulletin board, announcing an evening of artistic promise, in swirling gold letters. For the teachers and administrators, it was the most important night of the year. It was when they showed the town's more comfortable citizens what their donations paid for, hoping to secure the checks that would keep the lights on and the pianos tuned for another year. Miss Braithwaite, the director, was in a state of perpetual motion. Her heels clicked a rapid, anxious rhythm on the linoleum floors as she coordinated everything from the cheese platters to the seating chart. Her vision for this year's event was crystal clear. It had to be more polished, more impressive. It needed a wow moment that screamed progress and potential. In a meeting with the music teachers, she laid out her plan. "We need a student performance," she said, tapping a polished nail on her notebook. "Not just a choir singing folk songs. A proper, challenging piano piece. Something that shows the level of skill we can cultivate here. It demonstrates value. It tugs at the heartstrings and the purse strings." Mr. Alden, ever eager to please and proud of his students, immediately thought of his most advanced pupil in the youth class, a lanky, serious teenager with glasses who had been taking lessons for 8 years. The boy was talented, diligent, and could handle pieces that sounded difficult and impressive. "I have just the student," Mr. Alden said, his chest puffing out a little. "He's been working on Chopin, a very demanding etude. It would be perfect." "Chopin? Yes, that's the sort of thing," Miss Braithwaite said, her eyes lighting up. "The Winter Wind. It's dramatic. It's recognizable. It says excellence. Make it happen, Robert." So the pressure landed squarely on the shoulders of the teenage boy. At first, he was thrilled. Being chosen for the solo spot felt like a great honor. He practiced relentlessly, his notes filling the practice rooms for hours after school. But as the gala drew closer, the nature of the pressure changed. It was no longer just about playing the notes correctly. Ms. Braithwaite began to pop her head in during his practice sessions, reminding him of the important people who would be there. Mr. Alden started fussing over every tiny dynamic, every rubato, his usual encouragement replaced by a nervous, "That's good, but it must be perfect for the gala." The music, which had once been a joy, became a monster of expectation. The fast, tumultuous runs of the piece began to feel less like a whirlwind and more like a trap. The boy's hands, once confident, started to feel stiff and cold. Meanwhile, in the adult beginner class, life went on at its gentle, plodding pace. Elena continued to be the model student. She had progressed, in Mr. Alden's view, admirably. She could now play a C major scale with both hands together, slowly, and was learning a simplified version of a Beethoven minuet. She still played with that same careful, deliberate slowness, her expression one of deep concentration. The other students liked her. She was quiet, but always offered a kind word if someone was frustrated. She was part of the friendly furniture of the class. The week before the gala, the crisis erupted. Miss Braithwaite insisted on a full dress rehearsal in the main hall, with a few board members present. The teenager walked onto the stage, his dress shirt sticking to his back with nervous sweat. The grand piano loomed large and shiny under the lights. He saw the expectant faces of Mr. Alden, Miss Braithwaite, and the board members, and his mouth went dry. He began to play. The first few bars were shaky, but okay. Then he approached the first torrent of rapid notes. His mind went blank. His fingers, tensed like claws, stumbled, hit a cluster of wrong keys, and froze. A terrible, ringing silence followed the discordant sound. He tried to start again, from the beginning, but the same thing happened. His hands were simply not obeying him. He sat there, head bowed, humiliated, tears welling behind his glasses. Miss Braithwaite looked as if she might be sick. Mr. Alden's face was pale with dismay. They rushed to usher the boy off stage, offering awkward pats on the back. "Stage fright. It happens to the best of us," Mr. Alden whispered. But his voice was strained. The meeting that followed was tense. "We cannot have a disaster like that on the night," Miss Braithwaite said, her voice low and sharp. "The entire performance portion is built around that piece. What do we do? Put the children's recorder ensemble on instead? It will look amateurish." Mr. Alden racked his brain. His other advanced students were good, but not ready for a piece of that stature. They needed a solution, and fast. The next evening, in the beginner piano class, the air was thick with their shared anxiety. The students could sense something was wrong. Mr. Alden was distracted, his jokes falling flat. At the end of the class, instead of dismissing them, he and Miss Braithwaite, who had joined them, stood at the front with grim smiles. "Class," Mr. Alden began, forcing cheer into his voice. "As you know, the gala is this Saturday. It's a vital event for our center. We had planned a special musical performance that has unfortunately fallen through." Miss Braithwaite stepped forward, her eyes sweeping over the group of adults. They were a baker, a retired librarian, a nurse, a taxi driver. Ordinary people with ordinary skills. Her gaze, in its desperation, landed on each of them, searching for a lifeline. "We find ourselves in a bind," she said, her tone making it a communal problem. "But I believe in the spirit of this community. This center is built on people stepping up. Would anyone here be willing to perform? It wouldn't have to be anything complex." Her eyes flickered to the beginner books stacked on the piano. A simple piece, played from the heart, can be even more moving than a complex one. It would show the true journey of learning. The room was silent. The retired man coughed nervously. The mother looked down at her hands. The younger guy shifted in his seat, clearly wanting no part of it. They had signed up for quiet weekly lessons, not a public performance under bright lights. Elena, who had been quietly putting her sheet music into her bag, felt a cold trickle of dread. She kept her head down, hoping to become invisible. Seeing no volunteers, Mr. Alden tried a more direct, teacherly approach. "Come now, group. It's for a wonderful cause. Think of it as a final exam, but with a lovely reception afterward." "Elena," he said, his tone brightening with a sudden, misguided idea. "You have such dedication. You practice so diligently. What about you? You could play that lovely little minuet you've been working on. We could simplify it even more, just the right hand melody. It would be sweet." All eyes turned to Elena. She slowly looked up, meeting Mr. Alden's hopeful gaze. Her heart was beating a rapid rhythm against her ribs. The very thought of being on that stage, under those lights, made her feel faint. It was the exact opposite of everything she wanted. "Thank you," she said, her voice even softer than usual, almost swallowed by the quiet room. "But I am not ready. It is a kind thought, but no, I could not." Her refusal was polite, but absolute. Miss Braithwaite, however, heard only a challenge to her authority and a threat to her gala. She smiled, a tight, persuasive smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Elena, dear, sometimes we grow most by facing the things that scare us. This is a safe, supportive space. Your classmates would be so proud. It's not about being perfect. It's about being part of our community." The other students, sensing Elena's discomfort, but also feeling the pressure from the director, began to murmur encouragement. "You can do it, Elena," the retired man said kindly. "We'll all be rooting for you." The mother nodded. "It's just one little piece. It'll be over before you know it." Elena felt the walls closing in. Their kindness was a trap. Their support was the pressure that made it impossible to refuse without seeming rude, ungrateful, or cowardly. She saw Mr. Alden's pleading look and Miss Braithwaite's steely, expectant one. This was not a request. It was a gentle, public compulsion. A slow heat rose in her cheeks, a mix of panic and a deep, old frustration. They were looking at her, but they were not seeing her. They were seeing a shy woman who needed a push. They had no idea what they were asking her to unlock. In that moment of quiet desperation, a strange, defiant thought crystallized in her mind. If she was to be forced onto a stage, if she was to play, it would not be a simplified, childish tune under their condescending approval. She would not perform their idea of her. She took a slow, deep breath, steadying the tremor in her hands. She looked directly at Mr. Alden, her gaze clearer and sharper than he had ever seen it. "All right," she said, the word quiet but firm in the silent room. A ripple of relieved applause and smiles broke out among her classmates. Mr. Alden beamed, ready to celebrate, but Elena wasn't finished. She held up a hand just slightly. The room quieted again. "I will play," she continued, her melodic accent a little more pronounced. "But I will play the real piece, the one you wanted for the gala. I will play the Chopin." A stunned silence fell. Then Mr. Alden let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "Elena, the Winter Wind? That's a virtuoso piece. It's for advanced pianists. You're still on beginner minuets." "I have the music," Miss Braithwaite said slowly, her analytical mind whirring. She was calculating the risk. A beginner attempting and failing at a legendary piece could be a different kind of disaster, but it could also be spun as brave, ambitious. The spectacle of it might still be memorable. And frankly, she had no other options. Let her try. Miss Braithwaite decided, a curious, challenging glint in her eye. She was certain Elena would come to her senses in a day or two and beg for the simple piece. It would be a lesson in humility, and they would still have their volunteer. Mr. Alden, bewildered, just shrugged in defeat. He went to the music cabinet, pulled out the thick, complex sheet music for Chopin's Etude Op. 25, No. 11, and handed it to Elena. The pages were covered in a storm of tiny black notes, cascading lines, and dynamic markings. Elena took the sheets. Her fingers didn't tremble. She didn't even look at the music. She simply nodded, placed it in her bag, and said a quiet goodnight to the room, leaving behind a group of people who were now buzzing with a mixture of shock, pity, and sheer curiosity. They all believed, without a doubt, that they had just witnessed a quiet woman make a foolish, proud mistake that would end in embarrassment. They had no idea that they had just handed a lit match to someone who had spent years carefully bankering a dormant fire. The days that followed were a strange, silent battle of wills. Elena carried the weight of the Chopin sheet music in her bag like a secret, or perhaps a guilty conscience. In the quiet of her apartment, she finally laid the pages out on her own well-loved piano. The notes, complex and furious on the page, did not frighten her. They were in old language, one she had been fluent in since childhood. She had performed this very piece, more than once, in halls that made the Hillsborough Community Arts Center look like a shoebox. But that was not the point. The point was the quiet life. The point was the slow scales and the simple melodies that asked for nothing from her soul. This piece, The Winter Wind, was a demand. It asked for storm, for technical fury, for passion held in absolute control. It asked for the self she had put away. She did not play it. Not at first. She simply sat and looked at the music, her fingers resting lightly on her knees. Memories, unwelcome and vivid, swirled like the notes on the page. The bright, hot lights of a stage, the dry-mouthed silence before the first note, the crushing weight of a judge's stare, the desperate need to be perfect for teachers far stricter than Mr. Alden. The music had stopped being joy. It had become a test she could never quite ace, a mountain she could never quite summit. Until one day she decided to walk away from the mountain altogether. Now, they were pushing her back toward the base of a different, smaller mountain. Not understanding she had already climbed the peak long ago and found the view desolate dot at the next class. Mr. Alden was practically buzzing with nervous energy. He swooped over to her piano the moment she sat down. "So, Elena, how are we getting on with the project?" He said it with a wide, wobbly smile, like someone talking about a dangerous animal in a cage. Elena looked up, her face calm. "I am studying the music," she said simply. "Studying. Good, good. A lot to take in, isn't it?" He chuckled, a dry, nervous sound. "I have the simplified arrangement of that lovely minuet right here, just in case. No shame in it at all. Many professionals use simplified versions." He placed the new sheet on her stand, with large, friendly notes and the words "Easy Piano" at the top. Elena glanced at it and gave a small nod, saying nothing. She spent the class period practicing the minuet from the simplified sheet, her playing slow and careful as always. Mr. Alden watched her from across the room, his shoulders relaxing. He saw what he wanted to see, a woman in over her head, wisely retreating to safer ground. He was sure she would soon officially back out. Ms. Braithwaite checked in too, her approach more direct. She cornered Elena by the coat rack after class. "How is the preparation progressing, Elena? We're all so excited for you." Her tone was that of a manager checking on a delayed report. "It is progressing," Elena replied, buttoning her coat slowly. "You know," Miss Braithwaite said. Leaning in slightly, impact is about more than difficulty. A simple piece, played with genuine feeling, can often connect better with an audience. They can sense the authenticity. It was a carefully worded suggestion, a door held politely open for her to walk through. "I understand," Elena said. But she did not take the door. This became the pattern. Every class Mr. Alden would ask, with hopeful dread, if she was still planning to attempt the Chopin. Every time. Elena would say a quiet yes, and every time. She would then practice the beginner material, never touching the difficult piece in front of anyone. She never used the center's practice rooms for it. She never asked for advice on a tricky passage. Her silence and her continued work on the simple songs convinced everyone, from the director to her fellow students, that she was in a state of denial. The other students were kind, but their kindness was edged with pity. The retired man would pat her shoulder. "Brave soul," he'd murmur. The mother offered, "I could never do that," which wasn't exactly encouragement. They saw her as a lamb being led to artistic slaughter, too naive to understand the scale of her mistake. What they did not see were Elena's hands. When she thought no one was looking, during a break when others were chatting, her left hand would sometimes rest on her thigh, the fingers moving in a minute, rippling pattern. It was a subconscious exercise, a ghost of a muscle memory for the left hand underpinning of the winter wind. They did not see the faraway look in her eyes as she listened to Mr. Alden explain a basic chord, her mind clearly somewhere else, tracing the architecture of a far more complex harmony. One afternoon, about a week before the gala, Mr. Alden could stand it no longer. He stayed after class, waiting until everyone else had left. "Elena," he said, his voice uncharacteristically gentle, all his pompousness gone. "Can we talk, teacher to student?" She was wiping down the piano keys, as she always did. She looked up, waiting. This Chopin, it's a monster of a piece. Even my best students work on it for a year and still can't master it. I don't want you to be humiliated. He said the last word softly, with real concern. There is no courage in walking onto a stage unprepared. There is courage in choosing the right challenge. Let me help you. Play the minuet. It will be beautiful. For a moment, looking at his genuinely worried face, Elena felt a pang of guilt. He was a kind man in his way. He was just utterly, completely wrong. He thought he was saving her from a fall. He had no idea he was trying to coax a bird back into an eggshell. She saw in his eyes the absolute certainty that she would fail. And in that moment, something hardened inside her. It wasn't pride, not exactly. It was a kind of protective fury for the girl she had been, the prodigy who had been pushed and pulled until the music broke. These people, with their small expectations and their condescending rescue mission, were doing the same thing, just in a different key. They were trying to define her limits without ever asking what they were. "Thank you for your concern," she said, her voice low but clear in the empty room. "I will play the Chopin, as it is written." Mr. Alden sighed, a long, defeated sound. He saw not determination, but stubbornness. He saw a student refusing the help of her teacher. He nodded sadly. "All right, but please, at least practice it here once before the gala, so I can offer some guidance." It was his last-ditch effort. Perhaps, Elena said, which they both knew meant no. The night of the gala arrived. The art center was transformed. Folding chairs were lined up in neat rows in the main hall. A rented grand piano, glossy and black, sat centered on the small stage under a warm spotlight. People arrived in their nice clothes, the air filling with the murmur of conversation and the clink of wine glasses from the reception area. The atmosphere was one of cheerful, community support. Backstage was a different world. It was cramped and shadowy, smelling of dust and nervous sweat. Alana stood in a quiet corner, wearing the same simple dark dress she often wore to class. She looked pale, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. To anyone watching, it was the picture of paralyzing stage fright that Mr. Alden, in a slightly too tight suit, was a wreck. He had the simplified minuet sheet music clutched in his damp hand, his planned rescue operation. He scurried over to her, his face etched with anxiety. "Elena, listen," he whispered urgently, leaning close. "It's not too late. The audience is kind, but they'll know. They'll hear the mistakes. Take this." He thrust the simple sheets toward her. "Play this. I'll announce a last-minute change. I'll say you chose something more heartfelt. They'll love it, please." He was begging her. He was imagining the cringes, the awkward applause, the pity, the damage to the center's reputation. He was trying to save them all. Elena looked from his desperate, pleading face to the sheet music in his hand. A friendly, oversized notes seemed to mock her. She thought of all the weeks of gentle pressure, of not being seen, of their absolute certainty about who she was and what she could do. Slowly, she reached out. For a second, Mr. Alden's heart leaped with relief. She was taking it. She was going to be sensible. But her hand did not take the papers. Instead, her fingers gently closed around his wrist and pushed his hand, and the sheet music, down and away from her. It was not a harsh gesture, but it was firm. "No," she said. And in that single word, for the first time, he heard no hesitation, no softness. It was a flat, quiet wall. She turned from him then, looking toward the heavy curtain that separated the backstage gloom from the bright stage. The stage manager, a volunteer with a headset, caught her eye and gave her a thumbs up. It was time. Mr. Alden stood frozen, the rejected sheet music hanging limply from his hand. He watched her walk toward the curtain. Her posture was different. The slight slump of her shoulders was gone. She walked not with her usual hesitant step, but with a straight-backed, calm deliberation. It was the walk of someone going to a place they knew well, even if they did not want to be there. He felt a cold, strange feeling creep into his stomach. It wasn't relief. It was the first, faint drip of doubt. For the first time, he wondered if he had been looking at the picture all wrong. The heavy velvet curtain felt rough under Elena's fingertips as she pushed it aside. The light from the stage was a warm, wide pool, and for a moment she stood in the shadow of the wings, looking out. The audience was a soft, dark sea of faces and the rustle of good clothes. The grand piano, so shiny it looked wet, waited in the center of it all. It was a familiar kind of quiet, the quiet before the first note, but it had been years. The old, cold feeling tried to rise in her chest, the tightness, the dryness in the mouth, the fear that had once been her constant companion. She took a slow breath, letting the air out softly. This was different, she told herself. There were no judges here. No careers hung in the balance. Only a room full of kind people expecting a simple tune, and two teachers in the wings expecting a disaster. That thought, strangely, calmed her. The pressure was an illusion. Their expectations were so low, so wrong, that they meant nothing. She wasn't here to prove anything to them. She was here because they had pushed her into a corner, and the only way out was to walk straight through the piece they thought would break her. She stepped into the light. The polite applause washed over her. She kept her eyes down, not out of shyness now, but out of a need to focus, to shut out the room and go to the place inside where the music lived. She reached the piano. Without fuss, she adjusted the bench just so. She opened the fallboard, revealing the perfect, clean row of black and white keys. She did not have any sheet music with her. From the side of the stage, Mr. Alden saw this, and his heart sank into his shoes. No music. She was going to play from memory? This was worse than he imagined. It meant she would freeze completely. He clutched the simplified sheet so tightly the paper crumpled. Miss Braithwaite, standing beside him, had her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her face was a polite, professional mask, but her knuckles were white. Elena placed her hands in her lap for a final moment. She could feel the smooth wool of her dress under her palms. She thought of nothing. Not the past, not the audience, not the teachers. She thought only of the first chord, the feeling of it in her hands, the sound it would make in this quiet room. Then she lifted her hands and placed them on the keys. The first notes were not the whirlwind. They were the calm before it. A series of deep, resonant chords from the left hand, steady and solemn, like footsteps in snow. The right hand entered with a simple, haunting melody, pure and cold as an icicle. It was beautiful and played with a control that was instantly, eerily professional. The tone was not the tinny, hesitant sound of the practice room uprights. It was rich, nuanced, each note given its exact weight and color. The audience, expecting a stumble, heard this, and their polite attention sharpened into real listening. A few people leaned forward slightly. Mr. Alden, in the wings, felt his brow furrow. This was correct. More than correct. The phrasing was mature. He knew the piece. This was how it began. A flicker of confusion cut through his dread. Then the storm broke. The left hand's footsteps transformed into a relentless, rumbling torrent, a continuous cascade of notes that became the roaring wind. And over the top of it, the right hand unleashed the first furious gust of the winter wind itself, a breathtaking, blinding blizzard of rapid-fire notes, each one clear and precise as a chip of flying ice. The sound filled the hall, not as a noisy clatter, but as a powerful, controlled, musical force. In the wings, Mr. Braithwaite's professional mask shattered. Her jaw went slack. Her crossed arms dropped to her sides. She wasn't seeing a student anymore. She was seeing a performer. A real one. Mr. Alden made a small, choked sound. The crumpled sheet music fell from his numb fingers, fluttering to the floor unnoticed. His mind went completely blank, wiped clean by the sheer, impossible mastery pouring from the stage. Every assumption, every patronizing thought, every worried lecture, it all evaporated in the face of this truth. His eyes were wide, unblinking, fixed on Elena's back. On stage, Elena was gone. The modest woman was gone. In her place was a conduit for the music. Her body, so still in class, was now alive with it. A slight sway with the phrases, a lean into the powerful bass chords. Her hands, those hands he had watched move with such careful slowness, were now a blur of impossible motion. Yet every movement was economical, sure, and powerful. There was no hesitation, no struggle. It was fluency. It was like watching someone speak their native tongue with a passion and poetry you never knew they possessed. The audience was utterly still, caught in the grip of it. This was not the brave attempt they had been prepared for. This was not a community center recital. This was art, happening right in front of them, raw and real. The retired man from the class sat with his hand over his mouth. The mother had tears in her eyes, though she couldn't have said why. Elena didn't hear them. She was deep inside the winter of the music. She felt the old, familiar machinery of her skill engage, but for the first time in a long, long time, it felt different. The fear was absent. The crushing need for perfection was gone. She was not playing for a grade, or for a critic, or for a scholarship. She was playing because they had forced her hand, and in doing so, they had unlocked a door she had sealed shut. And behind that door, she found not the old monster of pressure, but the simple, fierce love of the music itself. The love that had come before all the pain. It was still there. It had been waiting. The piece built and built, a furious, beautiful struggle against the gale. Her fingers flew across the keyboard with a speed that seemed inhuman, yet every note in the complex, interweaving patterns rang out true. The final thunderous chords crashed through the hall, a last gust of the storm, and then ended with two stark, decisive notes. Silence, a profound, ringing silence that was louder than the music had been. It was the silence of shock, of breath held. Alana's hands fell from the keys into her lap. Her shoulders slumped, the energy draining out of her all at once. The performer retreated, and the quiet woman returned. She was suddenly aware of the heat of the lights, the smell of the dust from the curtain, the absolute quiet of the room. A cold fear, different from stage fright, touched her. What had she done? She had broken her own promise to herself. She had shown them. Then the sound started. It wasn't applause at first. It was a collective exhalation, a rustle of movement as people seemed to wake up. Then a single pair of hands clapping, then another, and then the entire room erupted. It wasn't polite applause. It was a roaring, standing ovation. People were on their feet, their faces amazed, thrilled, alive with the shared experience of witnessing something extraordinary they had never expected. Elena stood up, her legs feeling unsteady. She turned to face the noise and the blur of standing people. She gave a small, quick bow, not the bow of a concert pianist, but the same slight nod of her head she used in class. She wanted only to get off the stage dot. As she walked back toward the wings, the applause followed her. Waves of it. She pushed through the curtain, back into the dim, quiet backstage. The two teachers were exactly where she had left them. But they were transformed. Ms. Braithwaite's face was flushed, her eyes blazing with a new, frantic light, the light of opportunity, of discovery, of a story she could tell for years. Mr. Alden looked like he had been struck by lightning. He was pale, his eyes red-rimmed. He stared at Elena as if he had never seen her before. And in truth, he hadn't. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He took a step toward her, his hand half raising, a gesture of utter bewilderment. Elena met his gaze for just a second. In her eyes, he saw no triumph, no smugness. He saw a deep, weary honesty and a touch of sadness. She had not wanted this. She had not wanted to show them. They had made her. Without a word, she walked past them, past the stunned stage manager, and down the dark hallway toward the back door, leaving the roaring applause and the shattered expectations behind. She needed the cool, quiet night air. She needed to be just Elena again, the woman who lived in a small apartment and played simple scales. But she knew, as she stepped out into the darkness, that it could never be quite that simple again. The bell of her silence had been rung, and the sound was still echoing through the hall, and through the shocked hearts of the two people, who now realized they had been teaching a master how to hold a pencil. The cool night air outside the Arts Center felt like a splash of water on Elena's face. The sound of the applause was muffled now, a distant storm trapped behind brick and glass. She walked quickly, her simple dress feeling too thin against the chill, her hands shoved deep into her coat pockets. They were trembling, but not from nerves. It was the aftershock of release, of having unleashed a part of herself she had kept locked down for so long. The energy of the music still buzzed in her veins. A familiar, almost forgotten hum. Behind her, inside the bright, noisy hall, her world had already changed. The applause finally died down, giving way to a buzzing murmur that was even louder. People weren't talking about the canapes or the upcoming raffle. They were gesturing toward the stage, their faces animated with disbelief and wonder. Who was that? I've never heard anything like it in my life. She's a professional. She must be. In the wings, the scene was frozen for a moment longer. Mr. Alden slowly bent down and picked up the crumpled sheet music for the simplified minuet. He smoothed it against his leg, staring at the friendly, large notes as if they were written in a language he could no longer read. The contrast between what was on that paper and what had just flooded the hall was so vast, it made him feel faintly foolish. Ms. Braithwaite was the first to break from her stupor. The shock on her face melted, replaced by a swift, calculating energy. She grabbed Mr. Alden's arm, her fingers tight. "Did you know?" she hissed, though her eyes were already scanning the crowd, planning. "Did you have any idea?" Mr. Alden just shook his head, a slow, dazed movement. "No," he whispered. I thought she was just stubborn." The word tasted like ash in his mouth. All his teacherly advice, his condescending pep talks, his offers to rescue her, they played back in his mind now, each one a little humiliation. He had praised her for clumsily playing five-finger scales, while a symphonic storm had been sleeping in her hands. "We have to find her," Ms. Braithwaite said, already pulling him toward the back hallway. "We have to talk to her. This changes everything." But Elena was gone. They checked the crowded reception area, the empty classrooms, finally pushing open the heavy back door to stare into the dark parking lot. She had vanished into the night as quietly as she had arrived months before. The gala continued, but it was now the Elena Gala. The performance was all anyone could discuss. The retired man from the class found himself surrounded by people, telling them, "She was in my class. She sat right next to me." He said it with a kind of awe, as if he'd been sharing a bus seat with a mystical creature. The mother just kept shaking her head, smiling. "She was so quiet, so gentle. I just can't believe it." Mr. Alden moved through the crowd like a ghost. People clapped him on the back, congratulating him on having such a hidden star student. Each compliment felt like a small, sharp pinch. He hadn't taught her a thing. He had, in fact, tried to hold her back. The memory of him pressing the beginner sheet music into her hands backstage burned in his mind. The gentle, firm way she had pushed his hand away. She hadn't been refusing help. She had been refusing an insult. Meanwhile, Elena walked the quiet streets toward her apartment. The adrenaline was fading, leaving a hollow, shaky feeling. She had done the very thing she had come to this town to avoid. She had become a spectacle, a story. She wondered if she would have to leave now, find another quiet place, start again. The thought was exhausting. The next morning, a Saturday, the art center was quiet. Mr. Alden was there, alone in the beginner classroom. He sat at the piano she had used, running his fingers silently over the keys she had wiped clean after every lesson. He felt like he needed to be near the evidence of his own blindness. Missa. Braithwaite arrived, her energy undimmed. She carried a printed email. "I did some digging," she said, her voice echoing in the empty room. "Petrov. It's not a common name. I looked up competition results, old conservatory lists." She handed him the paper. It was a scanned article from a European music magazine over a decade old. The text was in a language he couldn't read, but the picture was clear. A teenage girl, her face serious and focused, her hands on a grand piano keyboard. Her dark hair was in a braid. It was Elena, years younger, but unmistakably her. The headline had one word he recognized: Virtuoso. Mr. Alden stared at the picture. The young girl's eyes held the same quiet intensity as the woman's. He thought of the careful slowness, the deliberate mistakes, the way she would listen to his basic explanations with that distant look. She hadn't been learning. She had been remembering, or perhaps humoring him. The weight of his misunderstanding settled on him fully. She was a prodigy, Miss Braithwaite said, her voice filled with a kind of greedy triumph. She studied at one of the top conservatories in the world. She won major competitions. Then she just stopped, dropped out of sight years ago. Why? Mr. Alden asked, the word rough. Why would she come here? To a beginner class? Miss Braithwaite shrugged, already moving past the human mystery to the opportunity. It doesn't matter. What matters is she's here. We have to get her to teach, to perform a full recital. This could put us on the map. Mr. Alden didn't hear her. He was thinking of the sadness he had seen in Elena's eyes backstage. He was thinking of the immense pressure a child prodigy must face, the constant scrutiny, the life consumed by practice and performance. He thought of her saying she wanted to reconnect with the simple joy of music. He had thought it was a beginner's naive wish. Now he understood it was a survivor's plea. On Monday evening, he came to class early, unsure if she would even come. But she did. She walked in at her usual time, wearing her usual clothes, her face pale but calm. The classroom fell silent. The other students stared at her with a new reverent shyness. The retired man opened his mouth to say something, then just smiled and nodded. Elena went to her usual piano and sat down. She did not look at anyone. Mr. Alden began the class. His voice was quieter than usual, stripped of its performative boom. He taught a simple chord progression. When it was time to practice, the familiar, hesitant, slightly clumsy playing began from Elena's piano. It was a conscious choice, a desperate attempt to rebuild the wall, to go back to being the student. Mr. Alden listened for a minute. Then he walked over and pulled up a chair beside her piano bench. She stopped playing, her hands going still on the keys, but she didn't look at him. "Elena," he said, his voice low, "you do not have to do that. Not for me. Not anymore." She finally turned her head. Her eyes were wary. He took a deep breath. "I looked you up. I saw." I understand now. I am so sorry. He wasn't sorry for the gala. He was sorry for every single time he had underestimated her, for not seeing the person behind the quietness. The class, if you still want to come, it is yours. But you are not a student here. Not in that way? He paused, searching for the right words, the teacher in him finally learning his most important lesson. You said you came here to find the simple joy in music again. After last night, I think maybe you were looking for it in the wrong place. The simple joy isn't in pretending to be a beginner. He gestured to the piano. It's in playing whatever you want to play, for no one but yourself. Even if it's a scale, even if it's a storm. He stood up, giving her space. The piano in the main hall is available any time you want it. No one will listen. No one will ask you for anything. He went back to the front of the class, his heart pounding. He had no idea if he had said too much, or not enough. Elena sat for a long moment, looking at the simple keys. Then, very slowly, she began to play again. But it wasn't the clumsy chord progression. It was something else. A slow, beautiful, melancholic melody that was neither a beginner exercise nor a virtuoso showpiece. It was just music. Her shoulders, which had been tense, slowly relaxed. Mr. Alden did not comment. He just let the sound fill the room, a private gift. He knew then that the modest woman and the piano virtuoso were not two different people. They were the same person, who had been lost and was now, tentatively, finding her way home. And his job was no longer to teach her, but simply to make sure the door to the practice room was always quietly left open for her.